Hi, hello everybody, and welcome to another SIG Windows meetup. It's the 1st of October, so have a good month, everybody. And as always, this is a recorded meeting, so adhere to the code of conduct for CNCF. All right, couple of things we have. So it looks like we have a good commitment around getting some work around Containerd and GMSA and the CSI work. What we don't have a commitment on, and we're having a little bit of problem with resourcing, is kubeadm. So the kind of two biggest things that we need to kind of worry in that area are essentially how do we make sure that we have a good test infrastructure for kubeadm, and make sure that upgrades are also working great. Kalia, that kind of helped us get us to this point, might not be able to work a lot on this. So I'm wondering if we can have someone that can spend a little bit of time and see, hey, is this like a couple of days worth of effort, or is this a couple of weeks, or is this a much bigger endeavor that we might not be able to do, to kind of help us on continue advancing kubeadm. Now, if you guys remember, kubeadm is super important because we need that to be able to go down the path of cluster API for Windows, which is going to be a much bigger endeavor. And I know that we have a lot of assets from VMware that will help on that, since VMware is kind of leading the cluster API effort. But we need to finish up the kubeadm work on our own. I kind of asked right before we jumped on the recorded call if Ben has a little bit of cycles to at least look into this. And Ben, if you do, check and maybe let us know next week and see if you have some time to check it out. And I don't know, I know Adelina is on the call. Adelina, do you guys have any capacity to kind of start incorporating some of the kubeadm tests for Windows?
Yeah, hi. We are looking into that. We need to figure a way to actually deploy it without having a ginormous footprint. I mean, not necessarily spending a lot of nodes and so on.
Okay.
But the idea is that we're investigating it, and the idea is to just replace some of the Ansible scripts that we did for the flannel work. Just replace it with kubeadm. That would be the idea. But we need to see exactly how much of a straightforward plan that how much of that works.
Okay.
It should be simple enough to be honest. I mean, it's just running that script and on the Linux nodes, just figuring out something else. But we are still in the beginning of the process.
So I got a quick question for you, Michael. So are you looking for testing around like kubeadm join, or are you looking for separate testing of kubeadm phases?
I think kubeadm join, we can start with that. That's where we concentrate most of our work for alpha. So I think that would be a good place to start for testing and validating that it works well on Windows, and have it as part of our automation, right, in our runs. And I think
the
that's
ask. Oh, sorry. The ask from Fabrizio is just to have a cluster that's spun up with kubeadm, and then I guess runs the ED tests on their test grid. So that would mainly just be join that's exercised. I think it's linked in the SIG Windows notes. Yeah.
Okay, I just had a note on that.
Yeah, and then the upgrades part is just simply validating it works. Lubomir said that it should work, and he did some work there, but someone needs to just, hey, does this really work? And if we can validate that, then we can basically put a checkbox on that. So Ben, if you can look and see if we can carve a little bit of time to do this, maybe a day or two, and if we see that it's longer than that, we can reevaluate and see if someone else can come in, or if we just need to.
So the other question I have is, do you have some tests running with like Kubo or something? Does that use kubeadm today, or is that like the predecessor to it?
No, it's completely different. It's more, I mean, it's more akin to just like the Ansible deploy that we have for, or that Adelina has for Flannel as well.
Okay.
So it's not using kubeadm at all. I think the shortest path would probably be trying to adapt the Ansible stuff, but I don't have much insight on how that all works.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we'll discuss that this week and then see if it's feasible for next week. Does that sound good, Adelina?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, cool. So let's move on to the containerd work, Patrick.
Okay. So a couple of updates here. So we've been working with Lantau over on the containerd side, and he's helped finish up and get a few things merged. So that we think that at least process isolation is probably going to be feasible in the next version of containerd, and he's been working on some testing there. And let me actually add a missing link here. I'm putting it in the notes right now. And he set up a continuous build that's building the containerd with cry enabled from the master branch, and it's outputting the basically some basic runtime tests there. And so that's something that we can use as a signal just to make sure that kind of the builds are there, but there's not actual released binaries yet. And so in the jobs that Annalena has running, right now they're building from a fork, but we should be able to move that back over to the master branch by the end of the milestone. So that's moving along good. We're taking that to SIG node in 20 minutes to get their feedback on it, and just kind of give them a status update because Lantau is active over there as well. I still want to push for getting Hyper-V working as a stretch. We have it marked as an alpha using Docker shim today, although it doesn't currently work. But that's using annotations, and so worst case we can still use annotations with containerd to enable and test that. But I've got a KEP update linked there where I'm proposing basically clarifying how we can use runtime class to work with Hyper-V and support multiple OS versions. And so let me share this out. And so that I was basically trying to think of a couple different ways that we could handle dealing with multiple OS versions and how that could be improved with Hyper-V. And one of the exercises I went through yesterday was I realized that we could actually use runtime class scheduling, which was brought into 1.16, if we wanted to basically make it easier to use the node selectors to apply the OS match for Windows. And then if we were to add an additional node label with the OS version, then we could basically set up a separate runtime class for like Windows Server 1809 and 1903 today, because the runtime class scheduler will just when it sees a matching run class on the pod spec, then it'll automatically the admission controller for a runtime class scheduling will just automatically append those node selectors. And so that would make things a little bit easier. But where things get difficult is that if we want to support running 1809 containers on 1903 or a later version, then we basically have to change the labels that are there. And so you basically, if we were to follow that approach, then all of your 1809 containers would have to run on 1903 with Hyper-V, because you're basically changing the node selectors that are being applied by that runtime class. And so that runtime class would sort of end up enforcing uniformity across the cluster. And I think that makes sense if you want to run just one Windows version. But if someone, for some reason, wants to have some remaining with process isolation, then it's going to be harder to pick and choose that. The other approach I was looking at was that if we were to continue using labels and node selectors as we are today without runtime classes specified, then what we could do is basically just create a runtime classes when we wanted to use containerd with Hyper-V enabled. And so that could apply the more restrictive set of node selectors that are there. And then the runtime class also lets us specify this handler that gets passed down to containerd. And so that would configure the actual runtime options to enable Hyper-V there. Since this handler is pretty important if we want to control the behavior of containerd. And so that would still give you a very simple deployment experience on the pod that's nice and very specific for how you want to run. But then these other details over here, some of that verbosity is basically hidden behind runtime class. Then the third option I'm looking at, and this is one that I want to get SIG Node to start weighing in on, is whether it makes sense to just put OS version and architecture there as part of the pod spec. I believe this might be the cleanest solution, because if we look at this kind of stuff up here, what we're basically doing is making runtime classes opaque and non-portable. And so if the intention is to actually let users opt into a specific CPU architecture on Linux or a specific OS and version of the operating system, then putting it in the pod spec is as transparent as we can get. Whereas otherwise, each vendor would have to basically say, here's the runtime classes that we support for Windows, and you would have to change that if you wanted portability from one cluster to another that's
that
running
makes
on a different
sense.
distro.
That makes sense. I like it.
So, I don't think this is still just kind of the first draft I worked on yesterday, but I'd love everyone to take a look at it and let me know, thumbs up, thumbs down, what you think, and if there's other cases that I'm missing here. Anybody else have any thoughts on this? Are there other use cases that we need to be thinking about?
I think we may need to spend a little bit more time on this. I personally haven't had the chance to review it, but I saw a couple of notes on it, but haven't kind of sunk my teeth in it. Ben, Deep, have you guys had a chance yet?
Not yet. I'll take a look today.
Okay.
Yeah, same.
So it looks like we all have to do a little bit of homework here, Patrick.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, this was a yesterday thing. I was stuck in off-site planning meetings all of last week, and so first chance I got to work on it was yesterday afternoon. So
sounds good.
That's great. Yeah.
All right, and should we move on to the next topic, Patrick? All right, cool. So the Windows networking DNS flakiness, I think Deep, was it you that filed this item?
Yes. So basically, this is an observation from some reports in SIG Windows, a couple of GitHub issues, and some testing that Jeremy was doing around GMSA, as well as something we ran into when trying to bring up pods in GCE as well. It seems like when Windows containers are brought up, there's a period of time when the networking is pretty unstable. Jeremy came up with a nice workaround for it where he patches in a post-start hook, a lifecycle hook, which just tries to kind of reset things and tries to reach out to a network address. But I was wondering if other people are running into this and if this is something on like maybe Dinesh or Kalia's radar around networking side of things.
Yeah, this is, I saw someone put a 60-second timeout. I don't know if that was Jeremy's patch that I approved. That was a 60-second timeout waiting until you get an IP address.
Wait, what?
So basically, when a container starts up, networking doesn't work. So I believe it was Jeremy, but I don't know if it was his PR that I reviewed. They put basically a loop up to 60 seconds to wait until you get an IP address, and when you did, it means networking came back up.
But what component did you put that in?
Go ahead.
Oh, Jeremy, do you want to comment? I think it was like a post-start hook to get the GMSA test to work, basically where, it would come up and it would try to constantly restart to get the DNS going.
Right. Basically what it was doing is net logon was coming up before there was a good network connection, so it wasn't able to actually log on to the domain. So I put a post-start hook in that restarts the net logon service until it gets a success back. And it only adds maybe 5 or 6 seconds to the pod startup. If you exec into the pod right away and you do an NL test SC reset, you'll bring it right up. But it's just like that net logon service is starting before the network's completely available.
Right.
Question: what networking solution are you using?
That was with I've experienced it with Flannel and with the Azure CNI.
Flannel overlay or L2 bridge?
Overlay.
Yeah, so I think there's a GitHub issue open on it. Maybe like someone needs to basically take a look with more, I guess, networking background.
So the issue here is that the code that we have today doesn't support network namespaces, and that requires moving to container D. And so the container has to start executing, and then the network interface is basically configured afterwards. And so there's a known delay there. When we move to container D, we're going to initialize the network once using the pause container. And so then when the other workload container starts, it doesn't have to wait on the network stack to reinitialize. And so like Dinesh had a comment on that back in July that says it'll be fixed when we migrate to container D.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense because Jeremy and I were wondering why container D or how container D would solve that problem. So that does
make sense.
More sense now. Yeah. Okay, cool.
That's good. So basically the current operating thing is that we're not going to do anything to fix it now. If any apps or tests need this, they can basically see what Jeremy did and duplicate that. And maybe we should put it in SIG Windows tools. I know it's a small module, like a few lines of code, but people can just copy it. And then in the future, once we get container D, then we won't have this issue. So maybe Jeremy, when you get a chance, clean it up and let's, I know it's clean, sorry, but create like a small repo in SIG Windows tools and let's just throw it in there.
Okay.
Well, why don't we just put this in the docs and let people copy and paste?
Like YAML fragments, I agree. Like we're already putting one blurb of it in the GMSA docs, but we can also update the overall Windows docs.
Yeah, well, I mean, by putting in SIG Windows, that's where we should have the code and just link from the docs.
Okay.
But let's do that.
Okay, yeah, as long as we could show the code, the example in line, because we've got like a troubleshooting section. So
Jeremy, I assigned you that work. Okay.
Okay.
Target D fork. Is that used deep as well?
Yeah, this was something that came up where we were trying to push a PR on the target D external provisioner that's maintained. What we were trying to enable before CSI proxy is completely in a beta or a stable state is get the target D provisioner to return PVs with a source pointing to the flex volume scripts that Microsoft has published and that we refer to from our docs. So there was a little bit of pushback saying from SIG storage folks that they do not want a vendor neutral repo like Target D to have references to Microsoft.com iSCSI. And if we can put the Target D fork, like, with this implementation in the Microsoft repos, because, then there'll be a direct relationship. Any thoughts on that? I think it was more of a question for Nick. I think he's not in the call today. So maybe I can ping him on Slack to see what are his thoughts. But if you guys have any thoughts, let me know as well. The suggestion was to potentially fork the repo because it's not being actively maintained, but it's great for test purposes for now, at least.
Is this just for iSCSI? Are you trying to configure an iSCSI initiator?
Right. This is basically setting up an iSCSI target and then using the Windows iSCSI initiator to, log on and get iSCSI PVs from that target.
Are you using the Windows iSCSI target or just the Windows iSCSI initiator?
Just the initiator.
I mean, what's the Windows iSCSI target? Isn't that shared spaces?
There is a separate one, correct. There's a Windows target, basically, iSCSI target, yeah.
The Windows iSCSI target basically serves a VHD over the iSCSI protocol, and it doesn't matter what kind of storage you have underneath.
Okay.
So I'll try to follow up with Nick on whether he wants to maintain this fork and go from there.
All right.
So if this code were just copied into this repo, would that be acceptable?
I think that's pretty much what they're saying. Fork it and push the PR in the fork.
Yeah, because I don't think that this is something that's vendor specific from a Kubernetes standpoint. It's something that's OS specific.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking too. I think the other alternative could be to move the flex volume scripts into something like that's not a Microsoft repo, but I think it'll still point to Microsoft.com/iSCSI. So yeah. I think it's more of a mechanics thing than an actual technical problem.
We have a few minutes, so let's move on to our last item, which was 1903 support. So I guess at a high level, I know we need to support 1903 as part of the container D work, right, Patrick? So that's kind of laying down the lay of the land. We need it for that.
Well, having 1903 there would make it easier to test Hyper-V isolation, but it's not an absolute requirement, because we could also test 1809 on 1809.
Okay.
And so we've got a script that will adds the support in kubeadm. I think that's fine. The main thing that we're lacking is getting test images and a prow job covering 1903. So Claudio, are your build scripts currently pushing 1903 test images to the E2E team repo or not?
Yeah, I've actually renewed all the images yesterday. So E2E team should also include 1803 and 1903. 1809.
Oh, so you're building 1803, 1809, and 1903?
I misspoke. 1809 and 1903. So the latest two versions we have.
Okay.
As far as 1903 goes, I've been using those images in my environments when testing the 1903 images and environment. So it's working for the most part.
Very nice. I don't assume we're expecting to see any differences, right? I mean, it's a more high performing, better, more secure version of the OS, right? Fundamentally, the API is the same, so hopefully it just works.
Yeah, I mean, the main differences are
On my container.
okay. And so that's something that I could take up with Adelina and look at the accounts afterwards to see if we have enough capacity to do that. Since the images are there, I think all we need to do is basically create another proud job and then update a parameter. Does that sound right to you, Adelina?
Yeah, that's basically it. We need to change the reference for the image and create a new job. So it's not a big deal, but as you said, we need to see exactly how are we going to add these jobs. I mean, probably decrease the frequency of the others or something like that.
Okay. Okay. Well, we can talk about that later. Okay. I don't have anything else there. Anyone else?
All right. Cool. Well, everybody have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you guys next week. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.